Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for joining us for our webinar this evening regarding cybersecurity insurance. My name is Bob Vecchio, the Executive Director for the Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association. We thank you for joining us. And once again, our upcoming events, our business dinner on May 28th at the Hamlet Golf and Country Club, where we're going to be recognizing and honoring several school board members with some school board service awards. And also, Dr. Bill Daggett will be our keynote speaker talking about artificial intelligence. So be sure to join us for that. Tonight's webinar is about cybersecurity issues, and we have had this as a familiar topic in the past, but we're going to take it from a different approach. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity insurance and compliance to make sure that if you have insurance, and most of us do, and those premiums are increasing every year, and it's becoming a major budget issue for us, but if you are attacked, it becomes a major operational issue in addition to a possible economic issue. We want to make sure that you're doing all that you can as board members and members of the governance team to make sure that if you have cybersecurity insurance in place, that the insurance company doesn't come back to you and say, well, you didn't follow X, Y, and Z, so good luck, sayonara, and we'll talk to you again. So with that in mind, we have to present with his expertise on that, Adam Bresh, who is a brand new second-time dad, just had a child 4 days ago, so he still looks well rested. So that tells me he's not taking the nighttime duty just as of yet. But Adam, I know that's coming. Mr. Bresh is the global head of cybersecurity, cyber at Acrisure, and is responsible for designing systems, custom cyber crime and technology solutions for Acrisure clients across the globe. He's a guest lecturer at Fordham University, Hofstra University, and leads cyber liability education for Acrisure clients throughout the country. He's a frequent speaker and thought leader on cyber risk, including featured presentations at Net Diligence, the Professional Liability Underwriters Society, Cyber Conference, and the New Jersey and New York City Bar Associations. He's a proud Tar Heel, so the last couple of months were a little bit difficult for Adam, but he graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and maintains a certified insurance counselor designation, Cyber Cope Insurance Certification from Carnegie Mellon Chubb, and was the recipient of Net Diligence's 2019 Toby Merrill Rising Star Award. So we want to welcome Mr. Bresh to our webinar this evening, and we look forward to hearing all about the information that he's going to present to us. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll be asking them as we go along. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand on our YouTube channel after this evening. And we will also be sending you, our live attendees, a brief survey so that you can give us some feedback on this webinar and suggestions for future programs. But without any further ado, I want to welcome Mr. Bresh. Adam, welcome to the program. And, before we got started, you shared a little interesting tidbit that you can do all the Elmo songs, as a proud dad should. The good news is we're not going to ask you to sing a full song of Elmo, but if you want to give us your best Elmo imitation as a good icebreaker, just to test that new dadhood that you have going on, go right ahead.
I'm too heartbroken right now, Bob. You brought up my Tar Heels again. I wasn't anticipating that kind of emotional roller coaster before beginning this presentation.
Fair enough. So we'll let you get right into the exciting topic of cybersecurity and cybersecurity insurance from your perspective. Sir, the program's all yours.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. And thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here with everybody. A proud Long Islander. I grew up in Rockville Center. So both my parents were educators. My dad was administrator in the Rockville Center School District for 30 years. My mother was a teacher in the Hewlett-Woodmere schools for 30 years. So this is, talking to this group has a, special meaning to me. So it's great to be here. And thank you, Bob, again, for putting this together. Bob obviously gave me the intro. That's me. And, I wanted to kind of give everybody an agenda to go kind of give them a high level view of what we'll be discussing tonight. And so start off with some of the numbers around cyber risk for schools. and then dive into a little bit of what's actually at risk for schools, connect that to how these breaches are actually occurring, and then most importantly, as Bob referenced, what you can do about it, right? So what can you do to protect yourself with cybersecurity? What can you do to transfer risk via insurance? And then how can you link those two together to be sure that you're going to get paid when a claim happens to you? So starting off with the numbers. $10 trillion, which is the number that you're looking at right now, represents the overall worldwide cost of cybercrime. Somewhere in the world, every 39 seconds, there's a ransomware incident. And congratulations to schools and public entities. You are the #1 most targeted industry by cyber attacks. 80% of schools in the last year have suffered some type of cyber incident. There's been some kind of cyber incident that's hit 80% of the schools in the United States over the last year. The average ransomware demand for schools is over $1 million. Nearly 1/3 of all of the folks that have been hit with ransomware have permanently had data stolen or lost as a result of that attack. And there's been a 278% increase in phishing attempts directed at educators. Last but not least, the average downtime from a ransomware attack and a cyber incident is roughly 3 weeks. So that can include just not getting back up to the level you were performing before that incident took place. The lingering effects of a cyber attack can actually hang on way longer than that 3-week number. So that's lots of good news. Always good to start that out. What's really driving a lot of these numbers? What's at risk for schools? So let's start with a big one: data. We know that schools are responsible for protecting a large amount of data. So you have to keep in mind all the data that you have on students, all the data that you have on teachers, all the data that you have on administrators. You have not just current employees, but past employees or prospective employees, right? Background checks. You have things like W-2, social security numbers. You have healthcare information. You have bank information. There are vast troves of data that are out there that schools are responsible for protecting. Next is disruption. So I mentioned ransomware a few times in the beginning of my presentation, and disruption is a big part of this because for a long time it was data breach, data breach, data breach, data breach. That's what you heard about from big companies down to small companies, banks, school districts, you name it. And disruption is really taken over as kind of one of the largest drivers of loss now due to ransomware. So interrupting the actual operations of school district or of an organization. And so, Bob, I saw you pop on there. Do you have a question? So when you look at that, disrupting the day-to-day operations is really, really scary. Just think about how much we rely on computers and software to do our jobs every single day. If all of that gets shut down, we can't use any of it. We can't track any of the things we're doing. We can't log any of the information in. How long before that has a permanent and lasting effect on a school? Last but not least, I think everybody gets this, is the dollar side to this. These bad actors, by and large, are in this for the money. So the ransomware attacks that you see, they're trying to extort money from schools, from public entities. The other way that this occurs, we'll dive into this in a little bit more detail, but trying to actually steal money, whether it's by hacking into bank accounts or tricking people into sending money or information somewhere via phishing attempts or some kind of fake invoicing schemes. We've seen a ton of those recently. Last but not least, reputation, right? So data, disruption, dollars, that all makes sense. That's what the bad guys are after. But what's really at risk here is your reputation. Think about how much work all of the folks in different school districts across the state put in and across the country. And all it takes is a bad actor exploiting one tiny vulnerability in a network to bring all that crumbling down. And so when you're thinking about this, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, it's not just an IT problem. There's got to be buy-in from each different side of the organization, right? You need to understand the legal ramifications. You need to understand the financial ramifications. You need to understand the PR ramifications. And so all of that adds up to you being sure that you can protect your reputation from these bad actors that are after you. So that's kind of what's at risk. Let's dive a little bit into how some of these breaches occur. It boils down into three main categories. So outside attackers, start with that. Outside attackers are kind of what you hear about all the time, right? These are the bad guys, these are the hackers. So the number one cause of loss has been ransomware over the last few years. So ransomware, for those who are unfamiliar with it, is a type of malicious software that corrupts legitimate software, takes it over, and locks down access to files or locks down access to systems in demand for a payment to unlock them. So these bad actors have created all different types of ransomware. There's all different types of ransomware groups. I'm sure you've probably heard about certain examples of it on the news. One of the things that I like to kind of point out here in some of these bad actors is that I think there's a misconception sometimes as to, a hacker waking up and choosing to target somebody, right? I think you can sit there and say, well, why would he want to come after me as a school administrator? Why would he want to come after my district? Who wakes up and decides to go after me? The infrastructure that's come about kind of in the ransomware industry mirrors a lot of what goes on in the SaaS industry or the software as a service industry. So think of that, but just for bad guys, and that's ransomware as a service. So a lot of folks have, taken their coding skills and they've developed ransomware. Doesn't mean that they're the ones actually deploying it. A lot of the times what they do is sell it to other people who can use it. And so rather than somebody waking up and deciding, I'm going to hack Bob, or I'm going to hack Adam, or I'm going to hack this school district specifically, what they do is they take more of a scattershot approach. So a lot of the times they'll do kind of a vulnerability scan, figure out what the security protocols of a given organization look like from the outside, very light touch, doesn't really raise too many red flags. And then they'll get a report back. It's an automated report, and they'll say, okay, I got these vulnerabilities in these certain spaces. So these folks are good, ripe for an attack. Now they buy a piece of software that's designed to exploit a vulnerability, or they deploy ransomware, depends on the user, and they deploy it, right? They send it out. All of this is automated. So none of this has required anybody to actually sit there and do too much work at this point. Then eventually they get pinged back when somebody clicks on something or when they're into a system. And up until that point, there really isn't too much human engagement. That's the point at which the bad actors realize they're into the system. And now they start poking around, figuring out, okay, is this a school? Is it an oil company? Is it a bank? Is it, a bakery? What are these folks? What can we take from them? What's most valuable? And what should we do next? Right. So I just like to break that down because I think a lot of folks have that conception that there's somebody who picks a target. And a lot of the times it's just the lowest hanging fruit that gets hit.
And
Bob, do you
Adam,
have something?
we just got a question. The
Yeah.
question is AI playing a part in outside attacks? Is it enhancing the hacker's ability? What are you seeing from a difference with the emergence of AI with this business?
Yeah, great question. So, I think AI, it plays a number of different roles. I think what we've seen is, there's been a number of articles about AI and its use for coding, right? So there's a lot of software right now that was historically written by humans that's being written by AI because they can do it more efficiently. It takes them less time, it just takes computing power. So if you take that same premise and apply it to the bad guys, it holds true, right? They're able to do more with less. I think that's the main message in what we've seen with AI. And the other side that I'll say, and I'll get into this kind of in my second slide here, is that the bad actors have been able to use AI to imitate humans very effectively.
Mm.
So that's taken a number of different paths. So one of them is just in emails, right? Being able to respond to emails. Now it doesn't require a person to necessarily sit there and respond to it. They can write really good emails that sound like people. They're also able to ingest a lot of information. So they can ingest, let's say, if a bad actor can compromise a system and take a bunch of emails from somebody. Now they can basically become that person for all intents and purposes. And the really scary one, and I just had a couple of meetings with some folks that I can't talk about, but it's very, very interesting. And a lot of their work is centered around verbal the use of AI for verbal fraud. So, a lot of the frauds that you see in social engineering are done, they start off on a computer, but now maybe you need to call somebody to verify something. What happens if you're able to impersonate somebody and use that voice as a confirmation? And now you've been able, and it really doesn't take a lot of audio to be able to accurately impersonate somebody.
And
So,
that, I think, is one of the more frightening developments, that
oh yeah.
somebody can actually clone your voice, for lack of a better phrase, and people on the other end are going to say, "Yeah, that sounded like Bob, and he was looking for this information." Yep.
100%. And I think, once again, I think another misconception for a long time was like, oh, well, these systems would need, hours of hearing you talk to be able to do that. And that may have been true at the inception of all this. But now I can tell you it takes a couple minutes of you speaking for those models to be able to pick up on that. So it's a great question. And there's a lot of different ways that AI is being. I think the easiest way to think of it is it's making a lot of that work more efficient for the bad guys. So, great question. So, moving on from the kind of the bad guys, the outside attackers, the other thing I like to point out, there's insider threats. Now, obviously, when you hear insider threats, it's easier to think of like a bad actor, like a malicious bad actor on the inside who's, and we've seen cases like that. I've seen some crazy ones where folks have, gotten jobs and applied for jobs specifically to get access to certain data, just so they could utilize that data to perpetuate other frauds. And sometimes they'll do that on the behalf of somebody else. They get recruited into a criminal gang. It's a cottage industry out there, and you will see that in rare cases. Where I think insider threats, where I think of it more prevalent, is just at the human level. Right, a lot of these, I would say, 90 to 95% of all the cyber incidents you see, in some way or another, involve an email. Who's getting emails? People, right? So when I say insider threat, I also mean that in the sense of somebody just making a mistake, right? Clicking on something that they shouldn't be clicking on, replying with information to somebody who looks like the person that they're used to, interacting with on a day-to-day basis. So think of all of the people that touch information and touch systems across your districts, right, across your schools, and that we need obviously we need humans to do all of this stuff. We're not trying to replace everything with AI. I think we need, obviously, people are going to be involved with this. So how can start thinking about how we empower people to kind of buy into this and understand that they can be a part of the solution on the cyber risk side. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Last but not least, third party incidents. Right? And I've seen a huge rise in these. So if you think of, your district, your schools as the hub in a wheel, right? The spokes that plug into it are all of the different third parties that you use to conduct business every day, right? We all use third parties. They make our business more efficient. They create powerful tools for us. There's all the reasons in the world to use third parties. However, each one of those spokes that plugs into the hub represents a vulnerability, potentially. Right? And so one of the things you really want to think about is what are the steps, especially if you're doing all the right things from a security perspective as a school, we're doing all the right things. Are the people that we're doing business with also taking those same steps? Right? What are we agreeing to in contracts with them if there is an incident? What are their responsibilities? What are our responsibilities? Because there's been a number of third parties to the education industry that have been hit, right? They've gone down, they've had a cyber attack, and that's impacted several schools, right? So you didn't actually get hacked, but somebody you did business with did, and that's caused you damages, right? How are you prepared from that, both from an operational perspective, from the IT and security side, and on the financial side of it, from a dependent business interruption perspective or dependent business extra expense perspective? So that's all bad news. I've given you all the bad news, told you all the bad things that are happening, why they're happening, who's doing them, what's going on. So this is the portion of the program that we could say, look, it's not all doom and gloom here, right? There are things that you can do to protect yourself. There are things that you can do to prepare for these sort of things. And there's people that are there to help you, right? Engage experts. That's what I always say. So what does success look like? Right? You want to have the preventative side, which is the cybersecurity side. So the tools and the software that's going to protect you. You want to add in the reactive side, which is the cyber insurance side of the coin, neither of which are a silver bullet. But the goal there is to become resilient to cyber risk. So you want to be able to prepare, you want to be able to respond, and you want to be able to continue on. That's the goal. So on the cybersecurity side, what I'm not going to do is get into a whole bunch of technical detail on these sort of things. I just like to give folks an idea of some of the things. You've likely heard of a lot of them. One of the things that helps me a tremendous amount when I think about cybersecurity tools and how they interact is bringing it to something that's more familiar, right? So if you think about securing your home, right? What do you do to secure your home? And what are the parallels in the cybersecurity industry? So let's start with multi-factor authentication, MFA, right? I think 7 or 8 years ago, if you talked about MFA, not a lot of people knew what it was. Lots of people know what it is now. Almost everybody knows what it is. And you likely saw it on your insurance applications almost overnight become a requirement. Part of the reason for that is the reinsurance market that sits behind a lot of the cyber insurance carriers realized that clients that had MFA in place were substantially less likely to have an account takeover and an account compromise and lateral movement that led to further incidents, which is why they pushed out that requirement to anybody that was using their reinsurance. So as a buyer at the end of this, right, your district likely saw that probably 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe, all of a sudden had to have MFA implemented across the network. The way I like to think of MFA is that's kind of like your locks on your door, right? So there's a key and there's a fingerprint, or there's a key and there's a code. The idea here is multi-factor authentication just means more than one type of method for authenticating an identity. It helps prevent lateral movement across an environment. It's not a silver bullet, but it does help. That's why you started seeing that all over the place. Then you get into vulnerability management, right? So think of this software as, you going around your house and routinely inspecting your doors and your windows and your roof and your gutters and everything that has to do with your house to make sure that, hey, we have locks on the windows. Are we locking them, right? Or are they just sitting there open, right? I think that's the best way to do that. Vulnerability management is a really powerful tool because it kind of looks throughout your network and says, hey, where do we have openings? Where do we have exposures? And let's set up a cadence for actually remediating those and closing those, right? Think about if you have a fence around your property and there's a hole in the fence, identifying it and then mending the fence. EDR and MDR, endpoint detection and response, or managed detection and response. This is something, if you've seen it recently, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike are some of the big names in the EDR and MDR space. There's a ton more like Sophos, eCentire. There's a lot of folks that do really well in the space. And the easiest way to think of EDR and MDR is if you hire security guards to monitor and walk around your house. And then if somebody tries to break in, they're not just going to point at it, they're going to investigate it, they're going to respond to it, and they're going to kick that bad actor out. That's the easiest way to think about EDR or MDR. Then you have email security. I hate to say there's not like a super great analogy to the home, but I think this rings true with everybody. One of the things that I'll just point out about email security is, for years, a lot of this stuff was just, spam mail or malicious attachments, the Nigerian prince schemes. And what's happened is there was a whole slew of email security software that got really good at flagging those type of emails and stopping them from going through, right? That's kind of the traditional vein of email security. Oh, it's coming from Russia at 4 in the morning, right? Or it's from XMZR4328 at AOL.com, right? This is probably not a real person, or it has 57 exclamation points. Let's toss it in the trash. A lot of that stuff doesn't even make it to your inbox anymore because those tools got so good. Going back for a second to that AI question, the email security side of things has advanced. And what we've really taken note of is some of the folks in the space that have advanced the technology for the good guys to respond to what the bad guys are doing. And there's certain companies that have essentially adopted AI, and what they'll do is they'll download an agent into your system, right? So it works with your emails today. It ingests that information and establishes a baseline for what's normal across the organization, so that way you're able to detect when something is abnormal, right? Is this person acting in a way that they usually do? Is there a request for money, right? Or an urgent request for money? It starts putting together different pieces of the puzzle and flagging those, so that folks are able to act on that, right? And so seeing those sort of things is really, really cool, because what you're seeing is the good guys on the security side fighting some of the tools that the bad guys have come up with, using AI. So that's always advancing, and all of these solutions, if you speak to me in a few years, I'm sure there's going to be a whole other generation of technology that's going to be out there.
And
Bob, you
Adam,
have a
I just want
question?
to go back for a second to the
Yeah,
EDR and the MDR, right?
sure.
I made note of that. The endpoint direct response, and then I think you said managed direct response?
Detection response. Yep. So yeah,
Detection
endpoint
response.
detection response and managed detection response.
Can you just explain a little further the differences between the two?
Sure, right. So, and this is a really it's an important distinction. So I'm glad you're bringing it up. If you think about think about every computer or internet connected device on your network as a nerve, right, in the human body that's exposed, right? If you don't do something to protect that, that nerve is very, very vulnerable to outside sources. Right? So what EDR does is endpoint detection and response. EDR is a technology that says, oh, this is unprotected. We need to be on this endpoint. We're locking it down. Right? And it's static. Right? So you implement that solution, you put it on your endpoints, it's there. Managed detection and response involves active management of those endpoints. So now somebody's monitoring it 24/7. Right? Makes a big, big difference, right? You're able to detect like that behavior like I was just talking about. You're able to detect when things don't look right. Instead of just hitting that one time, you're now doing it on a continuous basis. So that's really the difference. EDR is the tool itself that's going to be on there. MDR is incorporating the monitoring of the tool with that. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
It does make sense. It's not one or the other. They both work hand in hand, and best practice, you want to make sure both are in part of your plan,
Yep.
which ties back into the vulnerability management as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's exactly right. So all these things kind of fit together, and building on that, but I think what's really important is you have the SIM tool, which is security information and event management. So you can think of that as kind of the system that collects all the information from all, if we're going back to the house for a second, all your sensors, all your cameras, all your locks, all the alerts, everything that you get. right? Now within your computer, that would be all the alerts that you're getting from MDR, all the alerts that you're getting from vuln management. What you'll hear from a lot of IT and security folks, which I think is very, very fair, is that if you don't have a system for ingesting and managing all of these alerts, the alerts themselves lose their purpose. Because if I'm a security professional and I get 150,000 alerts per day, it
It
doesn't
becomes
mean that those aren't real alerts, but what are you supposed to do with that?
and it becomes white noise at a certain point for somebody.
Exactly, exactly. So it's not just about having the tools, it's how are you able to manage the information that those tools are providing you, right? And so, SIM tools is a pretty cool way to take a lot of disparate types of information from a system and centralize it in one place. Last but not least, data backups. Backups incredibly important. In my house analogy, this is be like if the burglars got in, they got past everything else. They're looking for the gold bars and all the money, and they get to your safe, and first off they find out it's a safe and it's locked up, right? And then even if they get in and break through that safe, if you got a cloud backup, that's like opening it up and realizing it's not there, right? So backing up your systems, backing up your data is incredibly important. What's also really important with this is testing your backups. And so, it's unfortunate that, a lot of folks, the first real test that they're getting of their backups is when an active incident is occurring. And in many instances, the bad actors will work very hard to get into the backups or disrupt the communication between a system and their backups before they actually deploy the ransomware or their ultimate goal, because that way they know that they've got you, right? If you know you can't access your backups, that's how they know they got you in a bad spot.
And you could also have corrupt files just from some bug or whatever, not necessarily having to do with the hack. And now your data is corrupt and you haven't tested it in a while to check the integrity of that. And the backup really becomes useless then at that point too.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you bring that up. We just had a case. It wasn't in a school, but it was the same type of incident that you're referring to. And the problem with the backup didn't actually have anything to do with the cyber incident itself. It had to do with the way that they were backing things up. And so they had backups and they had access to their backups, but they didn't realize that for a long time there was a problem with them. So when they went to restore, like you're saying, it was all corrupted. It was basically unusable. So not a great time to find that out, as you would imagine. So you want to make sure that you're testing these backups as well. Last but not least, I mentioned this before. The the kind of the first line and the last line of defense in cybersecurity are people, the people in the organization. So training folks, right? Making sure and that these folks understand what to be on the lookout for, and also the impact of some of these things when they happen, right? And so some of the best organizations that I've worked with have really spent a lot of time and have been really thoughtful about how they do training to get people to buy in and understand that like this is something that you can actually make a difference at. Just by doing the right things and paying attention to things and raising red flags as soon as something happens or you see something that's wrong, bring it up to somebody, tell them, right? Let people know what to be on the lookout for. You don't want to you never want to see people, and it's heartbreaking sometimes to see people who have worked somewhere, I've seen this, right, have worked in school districts for years, 20 years, 25 years, and they get tricked, they get fooled, and they tried to do the right thing but they got fooled and they lost a staggering amount of money. I've had multi-million-dollar losses because of an employee error, and just seeing the personal toll that takes on somebody. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants to come down hard on that person. They're not a bad person. They made a mistake, right? So what can we do to kind of support and empower people that are ultimately the first and last line of defense against these bad actors? So that's kind of the cybersecurity side. of things. Now we move on to the cyber insurance side of things. So this part should only take about 45 minutes. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just a joke. For the folks that are with us, I like to break down cyber insurance kind of into two buckets. We're not going to go into a super deep policy analysis. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards and go into any more detail that you want to. But I think it's valuable sometimes to just understand at a high level what cyber insurance is, what it was built for, where the claims typically come in, and also what it's not. I think that's important too. And the easiest way to think, I think everybody here can conceptualize like property insurance for a building. Right? This building is worth X. It's going to cost me this much money to rebuild it. I'm insuring it for this. It costs me this many dollars a year. And if it burns down, that's the money I'm going to have to rebuild it. Right? That makes a lot of sense. Cyber insurance is a little bit more nebulous, right? And I also like to say that it's a faith-based policy because what you're doing when you're buying cyber insurance is essentially you're saying I have faith that all the stuff that I'm about to talk about is actually going to happen when we get hacked, right? And that's tough for some folks to wrap their heads around. And I don't blame them. I live in this. I see cyber attacks every single day. I see companies go down every single day, multiple times a day. So for me, I see it a lot more. But the vast majority of cyber claims come in on first party basis, right? So what does that mean? So first party basis breaks down into a few different categories, right? The main one is incident response. So what does incident response mean? It means that if you have a cyber incident, say of a ransomware incident, boom, something happens, you can't get into your computers, you contact your broker, he puts you in touch with the carrier. If everything's moving the way that it should, you should be on the phone with counsel, right? And not, by the way, not corporate counsel, not somebody who's good at, code and village laws, right? Those are a lot of times those are fine attorneys and fine people. That's not who you want running as a quarterback for an incident response. You want to have experts, right? So that's breach coaches. You'll typically hear them called, and those are attorneys that run point on the incident response. The second group of people that get brought in are the forensics team, right? So those are going to be the technical boots on the ground. They're going to figure out what's happening. Is it still happening? What do we do next? Importantly, you want to make sure that the forensics work is being done at the direction of counsel. So what this does is it protects privilege should there be a third-party lawsuit somewhere down the line. So you bring the attorneys in, they do a scoping call, they figure out what's going on. We bring the forensics folks in. Those are the technical folks. They're going to get engaged in the situation, figure out what's going on in your system. And that's the first step, right? So the vast majority of claims, the vast majority of claim expenses are just in those two buckets, right? The next part of this, let's say it's a ransomware claim. Another part of first party coverage is reimbursement for the payment of a ransom if you do elect to go that way, right? There are some folks that, either for ideological reasons or for technical reasons, depending on the group that's involved with it, they elect not to pay a ransom. Once again, really important to have experts engaged in the negotiation here because you need to make sure of the track record of the folks that you're dealing with. Okay, if you pay a ransom, are you going to get that access back? Do the decryption keys work? Right? Are they going to publish your data anyway? Right? Are they going to delete all the data on your systems anyway? Here's another thing. You need to make sure that you do OFAC sanction checks, right? Because now you could be paying a ransom to a sanctioned entity, right? Now you just sent funds to a terrorist organization. Now we've entered an entirely different world of trouble, right? And so folks who try to, I call them the cowboys, my clients who are just like, I'll wing it, right? I'll figure it out. I can do this. I'll just pay them or I can negotiate with them and da da da. And they do. And then all of a sudden, the next call that they get is from the United States government asking why they wired, $500,000 to a known terrorist organization. Not a great call to get. Right? So you want to make sure that there are experts involved in each step of this process so that you're handling it the right way.
And I have a question. These
Sure.
experts, these are the experts that are employed or referred to you or engaged to you through your insurance carrier. It's not like you're going out and hiring these people independently. You're working, you said first call is your
Correct.
broker and you get in touch with the council. Are these the people that are on contract, if you will, with the insurance company that you have the insurance policy with?
Yes. And so here, and that actually, I'm going to come back to that too in a second because it goes into my how to make sure you get paid on claims. It's so there are panels on each insurance carrier. Right? Every insurance carrier has panels of really good attorneys and really good forensics people and really good PR people to use. Right. So when you file that claim, those folks can get assigned. The other thing you can do is you before you bind the policy, you can also get a law firm or a forensics firm endorsed onto the policy if they're not part of that panel. That's very, very important because many carriers either have sublimits for non-panel providers or will just only they'll just exclude paying people if because you didn't run it by them. A lot of times, what you also want to make sure of is that these folks are actually good at what they do. And so the carriers spend a lot of time vetting these folks. So, if you bring in, it's different if you bring in somebody and you say, hey, look, these are great folks. Sometimes it comes down to cost, right? So let's say, the going rate for forensics and making it up is 375 an hour, right? And that's what the carriers are paying these guys, and they're doing a great job. There may be a highly specialized forensics group that you have access to, but they bill at $1,200 an hour. Maybe you really want to use them, and that's fine. But what's going to happen is that carrier is going to set up a rate table. So they'll say, hey, we pay up to this amount, but every hour that they go on that's above that, that's on you. That's fine as long as everybody knows what's going on, right? And you're using good advisors on there. So I think that's important to realize. And as you look at the rest of first party coverage, just to go into this, you also have business interruption coverage on there, right? So, I think it's less, I would say it's less pertinent for public entities. The loss of income in a school isn't really a big piece of this, but the extra expense part of it is. And you see it framed as business income and extra expense. So, what are the extra expenses that you incurred as a result of this incident, or what wouldn't you have not incurred had there not been an incident, right? So what do those add up to? What does that equal, right? So some of those things can be, I've seen things like where if the entire system is shut down, or they believe that the bad actor is still actively in there and monitoring people's communications, what they'll do is forensics team, the attorneys will come in and set up kind of a satellite um, network that everybody, the key decision makers in that organization now have access to. So you have clean laptops, you have clean email addresses, you have clean phone numbers. Everybody can communicate that way. And we can stand those up really, really quickly, which is very cool. That costs money, right? But that's an extra expense that's being done to essentially make sure that the cost of the claim or the length of the claim doesn't increase, right? So what are we doing to make sure that we can keep that cost down and also get ourselves back up and running as fast as possible? So the last part, by the way, I'll just mention too on the data side of things, credit monitoring, things like that. If there is a data incident where you do need to notify individuals, so notification, credit monitoring, all those sort of things, making sure that you're notifying everybody in compliance with state guidelines. So every state has its own set of guidelines for data privacy regulation. That's a real that's a real fun thing to find out when you find out you have different states that are involved in this and you need to comply with the various state guidelines. How does that work? Once again, you want to make sure that you have experts and attorneys that are handling that on your behalf to help protect you from a third party lawsuit down the line. The last piece of first party coverage, technically, this is not cyber coverage, but it's one of these things that's kind of evolved, is cyber crime coverage. So actual theft of funds due to a cyber incident or due to a network compromise. And so theft of funds or securities is a crime coverage. So you very well may have this coverage on your crime policy. You may also have some on your cyber policy. The issue comes into play is a lot of times you have other insurance language on there that kind of points the finger at each other, and you have different deductibles. So one of those things where you want to make sure that everything's moving in unison when it comes down to a loss. But technically, it's a crime coverage. Most carriers, cyber carriers, have now added that in because of the overlap. That brings us to the other side of the coverage, which is third-party coverage. Oh, sorry, and last one I'll just bring up, sorry, is on first party is data restoration as well. So we were just talking about, data backups and all that sort of stuff. Recreating your data, accessing your data, rebuilding, that sort of stuff. If you don't end up paying a ransomware, that's where you'll end up seeing higher data restoration costs. So that's another piece that's covered under first party. Third party coverage, the easiest way to think about this is any of the liability or any of the lawsuits that are brought against an organization as a result of a cyber incident. So, typically they're framed in the way of a failure to prevent unauthorized access to a system or failure to prevent unauthorized access to data, resulting in XYZ damages. And so that can be from individuals, that can be from other organizations. It can be from regulatory bodies. So you want to make sure you have regulatory coverage on there as well. And then, last but not least, they'll have there's coverage in there. Once again, this isn't technically cyber coverage, but it got added to a lot of policies. There'll be media liability coverage out there. So some carriers will have that on there. Other ones will specifically exclude that for schools or for public entities. So it's a good thing to check up on and just understand what your exposure is there. Social media, websites, getting permission to use photographs. A lot of the time it involves underage children, right? Do you have the right to use imagery? Are you tracking metapixels? We've seen a ton of the metapixel claims out there as well. So making sure that you're protected from any of the lawsuits that come in as a result of a cyber incident happening. That's third-party coverage. So how do you make sure that your claim gets paid? And there's a number of different things here. And I know Bob and I are joking around, we were emailing last night. It's like, look, we want to, this is the key to all this, right? This is what folks want to know about. And it's really important. And like I mentioned before, I deal with a lot of claims, so I see this a lot. And just I will tell you, regardless of how well prepared you are, it's like the Mike Tyson quote, where it's like everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. That's what happens. That's what a cyber attack is for a school, for an organization. That's a digital version of that. So there's always going to be panic in these things. So a few tips and tricks to just keep in mind as you go through this. First and foremost, cyber attacks, cyber incidents are not just an IT issue. It's not, this is IT and security. It's not my problem. This isn't my part of the business. I don't have anything to do with it. Right? That doesn't fly anymore because we've seen this from big Fortune 50 companies right down to small schools and districts and public, municipalities. People are being held accountable for these sort of things, right? And it's not enough to just say, oh, it was IT's fault, right? Jeff's out, right? Jeff and IT, he's done. Right? That's not an answer. And in order to really effectively and efficiently prepare yourself and be able to respond to some type of cyber incident, you need to have engagement from each side of the organization. You need to have the financial folks and you need to have the executive support and the executive leadership. You need to have the legal folks involved in this. You need to have the IT and the security folks, and everybody needs to listen and understand the implications of each of the different sides of the business. Right. So what are we spending on cyber insurance? Right. What are we spending on cybersecurity? As the dollar amount that we're spending on cybersecurity and the work and the hours that we're putting in, is that being accurately reflected in the cyber insurance that we're getting? Right. And Bob, you and I had a meeting with a number of folks where that was a big sticking point. A lot of folks just said, I don't really feel like we're getting rewarded or even acknowledged for the work that we're doing on a lot of this stuff. Right. And that's the job when it comes down to, a broker, right? Why do you have a broker? That's part of the job there is explaining what each risk is doing to protect itself, right? Not every risk is created equal here. And if you're doing a good job, you want to make sure that that's getting rewarded on the coverage side. So having executive buy-in to understand, hey, okay, finance team, yes, this is what we're spending on cybersecurity. This is what we're spending on cyber insurance. What are we getting for all that? Right? What's our total cost, but what's our return on all of that investment? I think is a really important discussion to have. And that's what a lot of the discussions that I have with organizations are centered around is bringing everybody together, figuring out what the ultimate goal is, and then working towards that. Right. So don't just make it an IT issue, right? Can't just blame it on Jeff. Applications, right? Don't fudge applications. And this is something that I think is big, right? You do not want a lot of the reasons that claims get denied is there's misrepresentations on applications. Now, what I will say is I do think that there's been a slightly unfair, call it undercurrent out there that, cyber carriers are denying claims left and right, due to maybe mistakes on applications or things like that. There was one carrier that just came out that noted that they had paid 99% of all the claims that had come in. And I can tell you, by and large, cyber carriers are paying claims. Right? What they're not going to pay claims on are intentional misrepresentations of your risk. Right? And here's what you have to understand, and this is something, I was taught a very long time ago in brokerage, is there's a price for everything. Right? There's somebody who we'll figure out a way to get this written, but you can't lie about what you're doing. Right? Yeah, it might be more expensive. You know it's going to be a heck of a lot more expensive when you're staring down the barrel of a $2 million loss, and now your carrier is denying that, and you're paying $2 million. So whatever you paid, as long as it was less than 2 million, was probably a better deal than trying to fudge the applications, right? So
It's expensive to be cheap.
Exactly, right? Think about the long game in all of this. Another thing that I like to put out there is timely notice. If you have something that you think is going on, right, don't sit on it. Right? Even if it's just putting the carrier on notice and you're not even sure yet, right? You're like, I don't know. This is something we got going on. We're looking into it. I'm not sure. Just let them know, right? Put them on notice. Tell your broker, tell your carrier, say, hey, look, we got a situation. Don't know what it is. Could be something, could be nothing. Just want to let you know. And they'll say, I guarantee you, they'll say, great. Would you like someone from our team to hop on a call? Right? Get them involved sooner than later. What you don't want to do is sit on it, either shove it to the side or try to fix it yourself, maybe. Right? And then all of a sudden, when things go sideways, now we call in the carrier, and now it's been a week, 2 weeks. That's a good way to get your claim denied and also mess up the entire process. Right? So let people know, even if it's just putting them on notice. This ties into what I was just saying. Don't go rogue. Okay. Don't have an incident, then start calling all kinds of random vendors, trying to fix it yourself, get a huge bill, and then file a claim. That's another reason the carriers will deny claims, right? Because you did all of that without the approval of the carrier. Right? And you may have taken the right steps, you may not have. Right? But the point is, you didn't engage any of the people that you have the contract with. Right? So don't go out there and try to run it yourself and then just submit a bill. Right? That's a good way to end up with that bill coming right back to your desk. Nobody wants that. Right? So there's a lot of different ways to avoid that. Number one, like I said, put folks on notice, tell carriers, hey, these are some people that we'd like to get involved. Ideally, what you want to do is get to know the people that are the incident response providers that you want to use, whether they're panel providers or you have your own that you'd like to know, that you'd like to use. Get them endorsed onto the policy. right? Have the carrier vet them and endorse them onto the policy, know that they're going to be covered. Right? That's a way better feeling than just leaving it, not knowing who to call. You're in a panic situation. Somebody on the board knows somebody who does this. Oh, we'll get them involved. All of a sudden, you got a huge bill. Now we submit it to the insurer. Now we can't get paid. Our claim got denied. And by the way, they want to bring in people to make sure that the people you brought in did the right thing. So now we're spending twice as much money. Don't
And
go
when it's
rogue.
time for renewal, you're going to have a big problem.
Absolutely. I can promise you that. So don't go rogue, right? Document things. Document, document, document. Right? When an incident occurs, document everything that's happening. Document expenses. Document people that you're paying, right? Put all of this somewhere, save it, right? And nominate someone in this process on your side who's going to be responsible for that. Make sure you have the backup as to why we were doing this, right? Here's why this expense was incurred. Here's why we had to do this. Here's what the exact dollar amount was, who it was, when it was, boom. That's a way easier way to get your claim paid, right? Rather than just saying, oh, it was 150 grand. Now you're going to get into the nitpicky side of the claims. Okay, well, what was this? What was that? Well, if you're able to show from your side, makes it a lot easier on the claims adjuster. It makes it a lot easier to get that money. And it also makes it a lot easier to get the money paid quickly, right? That's another thing. You may get paid, but I would think everybody on here would agree we'd like to get paid as quickly as possible when an incident occurs. Make sure there aren't trap doors in your policy. I just had one earlier today before I got on this call. I was on with some of my folks in the West Coast, and they sent me a policy for a fairly large organization. I'm leaving all of the details out of it. And these folks had no idea that they had something in their policy that sublimited their entire limit by 50% if there was a catastrophic loss. And so the way that the carrier defined catastrophic loss is however they wanted to basically, right? It was if Amazon went down or Google went down or Microsoft went down or there was something that hit something impacted the state, right? And they used the state, a sovereign entity that led to XYZ happening, right? And that was put on a while ago, like in the hard market, like those things were more common, and that was because of reinsurance, and a lot of that stuff was out of London. And the bottom line was what I could tell from looking at that policy was nobody had really looked this over and taken the effort to remove it from the policy. These people had no idea that that was there, right? Then their dependent business interruption loss was also sublimited. Right? So there's sublimits. All of a sudden, it looks great on that first page that you look at. Who likes reading insurance documents?
God
Not a lot
bless
of
you.
people, right? Right. Look, and here's what I'll tell you. I'll share this with you about myself, right? I am not a coder or an engineer by background, right? The way that I got to where I am now is I actually sat there and read all of these policies. I incurred that brain damage. They are written by white shoe attorneys for other white shoe attorneys. The people who wrote them are very, very intelligent. And unless you have firepower going back at the underwriting community, those trap doors are going to be in there and you're not even going to know it. Right? And the only time you find it out is when you have a claim. Right? If there's a theme to this whole presentation is don't make it so that you're finding all these things out in the middle of a crisis scenario. You don't have to do that, right? That's not what you have to do. And so I say all of that, and I bring up our dear friend Benjamin Franklin, who probably did not envision himself, or maybe he did, being mentioned in a broadcast where people can see and hear each other on computers after he's passed away for a few hundred years. But the idea of a failure or without a plan, right? If a failure to plan is planning to fail, right? That statement holds true for cyber risk in almost every single facet, right? It's a very stressful situation when you get taken down, right? And everyone is panicking. Everyone in the organization, trust me, like I said before, remember I said it's not just an IT problem. Trust me, everybody in your organization, everybody at the top, everybody all the way down there is going to be asking a lot of questions and everyone's going to be freaking out. Have a plan. Speak to the experts, right? Talk to the people that know what they're doing, right? And Bob and I have spent time discussing this as part of the reason, that I'm here with you today is there's a lot of resources out there. And just on a personal level, like I mentioned, I'm from New York. I went to, public schools on Long Island. Like I want to see school districts protected. I want to see them have access to the right things. I want to see them be able to invest intelligently in cybersecurity and cyber insurance and find a way to combine both of those things to provide value for all of the school districts on Long Island. And that's part of what we're working with Bob on. You can see Andy on my team who's on here is building out, a program that does that. And Bob, you can talk a little bit more about it if you want to, but the idea here is the tools and the resources are available and they're out there. And we want to make sure that everybody who's watching this or talking to somebody else about it has access to that. And it's cybersecurity and it's cyber insurance and it's combining both of those to make sure that the investment that you're making is actually worthwhile, it's valuable, and it protects you from each side.
Adam, you've given us a ton of information, right? And I sit here as a former board member, and I'm trying to think. It's the governance team at the table. Where you've given us a lot of peeks behind the green curtain, if you will, and getting into the weeds. But that helps us be informed to help us shape what policies we may implement as an organization to set the expectations for all the various departments to make sure this is working. And like a couple of takeaways for me, and before we introduce Andy and get into the last thing that you were talking about, we have tabletop exercises and we have policies and procedures for security, physical security incidents at our school, which of course, we're reminded almost daily as to why that's so important. I
Sure.
almost think, we should have like a cybersecurity response team and procedures and you know test out those procedures and getting back to you raise my eyebrows with the trap door within your policy. And again, it's always the devil in the details that's going to get you at the end. So maybe as board members, as an expectation that we set with our superintendent and their cabinet is, okay, when we get this policy in place, maybe there's somebody we send it out to do an assessment of the policy, just like we're assessing our vulnerability with our network and our machines and our access points. Let somebody do an independent assessment of the policy and point out, is there a trapdoor? What is it? And what are the limitations and what can be the problems? And then you're weighing it out and you're making an informed decision prior to purchase or
Yep.
renewal. Those are some key takeaways for me. And you laid out some really important best practices that, again, we don't dictate regulation and the actual procedures. We set policy, but do we have multi-factor authorization, which most everybody does nowadays? Vulnerability management, what does that look like for our organization? EDR, MDR, your IT departments and the people that are dealing with this every day, they could actually do a presentation to the board saying, okay, here's what we do, or here's what we contract out with Nassau BOCES as an example, and this is what they're
Right.
providing on the back end because we're a small school district, we don't have this huge staff, but that's one of the services we get from them. The email security, the security information and management, all these things, these as board members, as policy setters, and of course fiduciaries who have to make the resource investment in these things, are these the things we have going on in our organization to protect us, to make sure that A, operationally we're protected as best as we can, and B, from a claims payment, we're not staring down thinking that we're going to have some coverage, and then all of a sudden they say, well, yeah, no, not so much. And that was the point of this. So thank you for all that information, because you definitely have gotten my mind turning, and I'm sure other board members, as they watch this and review this, they'll think along those lines too. Andy Ryan is also with Acrisure. And Andy, we've been talking about, how to be proactive, because this is, you know, on our radar as a huge escalating cost that is going up. It's not going to go down anytime soon. There was a recent high profile third party vendor data breach, right? Chapter 2D laws have just entered into the education space, which puts other priorities on us as far as compliance go, and non-compliance is going to result in fines and data breach uh, methods and things that we don't want to deal with the state education department on. Andy, let's talk about this program that you guys are uh, kicking around here that could be beneficial for some. This really isn't an infomercial; it's just information that maybe we haven't heard about in the past.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I just wanted to take 2 seconds to brag on Adam because he goes over a bunch of information. He's probably one of the most knowledgeable cyber um, insurance professionals in our country, in the US, in our industry. So there aren't many Adams. And the one cool thing about Acture is we have somebody like Adam, and that just, going to a standpoint of most brokers out there that are selling cyber insurance really don't understand what Adam just referred to as the trapdoors. And, they're selling these products not understanding the details. And I don't think it's out of them trying to be malicious, right? It's just they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And, they're trying to satisfy their clients' needs, but in doing so, sometimes they're unknowingly being malicious. And so what we're trying to develop here for the school districts on Long Island is basically a program. So when you come to us and want to purchase cyber insurance, then it's been vetted by Adam Abrish and his team, and that every trap door that can be removed from the policy is removed from the policy. So you have that confidence level that everything that you think you're buying, you are buying. And when you want that claim to be paid, Adam's going to make all the what he was talking about before is when a cyber event happens, it's a 4 alarm fire, 5 alarm fire, whatever that's called. You don't want to be sitting there saying, what legal team should I use? What forensic team should I use? So that's what we really want to prepare all the school districts. My wife's an educator. She works in the West Islip public school system. And, to get all the, to get everybody on the same page of like, here's our board panel of attorneys, here's our incident response teams. And so everybody has a playbook that if something does happen, everybody knows what to do and how to do it and in a timely fashion, and know that they've got the best professionals dealing with it. And I think that's the real difference maker here that we could potentially achieve.
Yeah, and it's all about being as proactive as possible, so that you're really limited with how much you're just doing on the fly in a reactive situation. It becomes more reflex than react, right? Because you have all these things in place, and people know what their jobs, roles, and responsibilities are when the incident happens, right? Because you can't sit there and say it's not going to happen. It's not if, it's when, right? And many of us have already experienced that. So that was the other takeaway for me, is being proactive as much as possible, so you limit the exposure to being reactive. And Adam, the other thing, from an operational standpoint, right? Our phone systems, our internet protocol, right? So if the phone systems go down and there's an incident happening in a community and parents can't call to find out what's going on because they saw something on the mom's Facebook page, that's one of those
Panic.
reputational things that do long-term damage that you really can't assign dollar figures to. But again, these are the things we need to be thinking about. Or, we're doing instruction with, interactive online stuff. If that goes down for any period of time, what is the academic loss? So those are the things that I was thinking about as you were talking too. And folks, we do have some time remaining here. So if you have any other questions, put it in the Q&A. Again, this video is going to be available on demand on our YouTube channel in the days ahead. And Andy, you're exactly right. Adam went through so much detail, but I'm not a smart guy, but I was able to follow and understand what he was saying and kind of relate it back to, as a board member, what are the things I would be asking our senior cabinet team? what do we have in place, and maybe a presentation as to here's what we have in place, here's where we need to go. Or you bring in an outside, just like you would do an outside entity coming in and doing a physical security assessment of your buildings and your campuses and your security technologies. This is almost the same thing for the world of cyber,
Yep.
is the way I view it.
Yeah, and the that I also like to leave with just some good news for folks, like because I kind of joked around about it. I mean, I talked about a lot of scary, bad things that we were
Yeah,
talking
paying a
about.
terrorist organization was probably the
I,
scariest I
yeah,
heard.
yeah, right. And I
Think of the
think that
PR nightmare there.
yeah, exactly. Not a good headline for Newsday. Um, I think about um, the kind of the good news in all of this is that there are steps you can take, right? There are things you can do, to prepare. And, like the folks that you're talking about, like getting together with those, like the breach council people and the forensics people, knowing those people, I find is so valuable. And, Andy mentioned it because a lot of people view, a policy is just a static paper document, right? It sits in your email or it sits in a drawer and it's there, right? And the value of that paper is that response, right? That's the faith-based part that I was talking about. And I think it helps to bridge that gap to faith if you meet the people on the other side of that and understand what it should look like when something happens. Because you talk about it, the reputational side of it can be really, really negative if you screw it up. Guess what? It can be really, really good if you handle it well, right? There's been a number of different incidents that have occurred where people came out better on the other side of it because of how they handled the situation. Right. And so I want to keep that in mind, right? It's not all negative. You can turn this into a positive and really put some people's minds at ease. So, I think the Andy and I work on this a lot together, and you know, kind of just demystifying this stuff, right? There's a lot of complicated terminology in there. The cybersecurity side of it is very technical. They can get overwhelming. Same thing with the insurance language. There's a lot in there. It doesn't have to be all technical, right? That's why you get the experts involved, is to be able to handle that side of it for you. And you bring it up to a level where everybody understands organizationally, what's my responsibility? What do I need to do? And now everyone's taking an active role in that and working together, right? Not working at odds with each other, which I think is hopefully, and I've seen this in a lot of my clients, that's been an outcome where folks have started kind of at each other's throats on a few different things and have come out of it in a much more positive way. So that's always the goal for me too, just thinking more broadly about it.
Yeah. And what I think too, again, reputation, and not to use the negative, but I'm a resident of Suffolk County, and Suffolk County had a very high profile incident that shut down operations across the county. You're talking Department of Social Services. I couldn't make a golf tee reservation. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the least of the problem. But I mean, it really shut the county down, and they're still recovering from that because and so many lessons learned. And again, you come out of the other end in a stronger place because of what you went through, because you never want to be there again. And I mentioned the backup thing because I was in healthcare for 32 years, and that happened to us. We lost a server, and no problem, get the backup, and the backup was corrupt, and well, no problem, we back up, and have stored, 2 weeks worth of tapes going back to the day of tapes, right? Well, guess what? The corruption probably happened months ago, but we never tested that back up to make sure we were able to restore our data. And we had to basically recreate our database, which took, I can't tell you how many hours of overtime to make that happen. But yeah, it's one of those things you don't want to be there, but be as proactive as you can be. And I appreciate both of you taking the time and sharing this information with us. And for folks that are watching this, Adam's contact information is there intentionally, because if you have follow-up questions or you want to pass this information along to your team to say, hey, dip your toe in the water and have a conversation, and is this something worthwhile pursuing for us? Absolutely do it. Again, you could tell by what he was able to explain in an hour is years and years and years of experience and expertise. The only thing that confused me is white shoe attorneys. That's a new expression for me, so I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Means they're expensive.
Okay, gotcha. I immediately thought of National Lampoon's Vacation and Chevy Chase with the white shoes in the
Yeah,
hotel room.
there you go.
Not very expensive. All right. Andy, Adam, anything else you want to impart upon us before we wrap it up? Because I'm a big fan of 90 minutes or less. Otherwise, we're wasting people's time.
No, I think I just want to reiterate, thank you for having me on here, Bob. I think a lot of the impact of this relies in just awareness, right? Taking an action, take a first step. That would be the only thing that I hope everybody comes around on this. Act on it. Start moving, even if it's something small. You can get going on a lot of this stuff tomorrow if you want to. So thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you for taking the time out and sharing your expertise with us. And Andy, any parting words from you?
No, just thanks again, Bob. Thanks to Bob and thanks to Adam, and really look forward to meeting a bunch of folks and seeing what we can do to provide some of that expertise on a local level.
All right. Folks, thanks again for joining us. We'll be sending out a brief survey so you can give us our feedback on this particular webinar and also suggest information that you'd like to see in future webinars. And join us again at our annual business dinner on May 28th at the Hamlet Golf and Country Club. We're going to be honoring some great school board members. And Dr. Bill Daggett will be our keynote speaker, and he'll be talking about artificial intelligence and its impact on education. If you've never heard Dr. Bill Daggett speak, I highly recommend you coming out just to hear what he's got to say. Really intelligent guy. So once again, I want to thank the folks from Acrisure, and we want to thank you for taking the time out to watch this. Any questions, of course, reach out to Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association. Anything we can do to help, we're here to assist. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.